Welcome to American National Government. In this course, you will discuss the purpose, structure, and evolution of United States government.
I'm Jordan O'Connell, History and Government Instructor at Northeast Iowa Community College. This lecture distills a decade of my written notes taken from American Government, Roots and Reform, American Government by Lenz and Holman, and our course-assigned OpenStax American Government textbook. This lecture focuses on mediating institutions and the civil society burden. The core question is this: what happens to a republic when the mediating institutions that teach restraint, obligation, and cooperation become weak, hollow, or openly partisan? The core competency is to describe the role churches, schools, communities, and other mediating organizations play in preserving civil society.
What happens to a republic when the mediating institutions that teach restraint, obligation, and cooperation become weak, hollow, or openly partisan? The problem moves through churches, schools, unions, neighborhood groups, mutual aid, and the local institutions that teach cooperation before government intervenes. The Constitution can create offices, divide power, protect rights, and set procedures. It cannot by itself make citizens patient, trustworthy, cooperative, literate, honest, charitable, or brave. That work happens in the space between the isolated individual and the state. Families, churches, schools, unions, clubs, charities, neighborhood groups, youth leagues, mutual aid networks, libraries, local boards, volunteer fire departments, and civic associations teach people how to show up, argue, serve, obey rules, challenge rules, raise money, keep minutes, forgive, exclude, and lead. That space is civil society. The civic problem is that Americans often ask too much and too little of these institutions at the same time. We expect them to form decent citizens, repair loneliness, feed the poor, teach public memory, create trust, mentor young people, respond to disaster, and soften political conflict. Then we neglect them, mock them, politicize them, or abandon them when participation becomes inconvenient. A society cannot outsource every public problem to Washington and then complain that national politics feels too large. It also cannot romanticize local institutions when some of them teach prejudice, hide abuse, or silence dissent. Mediating institutions are organizations between individuals and government that shape civic life and social trust. They mediate because they stand in the middle. They keep citizens from facing the state alone, and they keep the state from becoming the only source of public meaning. They help people practice cooperation before the stakes become national law. Tocqueville carries force here because he saw American associations as a school of self-government. Citizens acquire democratic habits not only by voting, but by organizing. They formed groups to solve problems, defend beliefs, build schools, support churches, improve towns, raise funds, publish arguments, and pressure officials. The hard question is whether those mediating institutions still carry the maintenance burden of democracy, and whether they deserve trust when they fail. Civil society operates before, beside, and sometimes against government. A church may feed families before a welfare office arrives. A school may teach citizenship before first-time voting begins. A union may train workers to bargain before they enter formal politics. A neighborhood association may pressure City Hall about zoning, policing, sidewalks, drainage, or development. A mutual aid group may respond faster than an agency during crisis. A parent-teacher organization may translate household concern into school governance. These are not decorations around government. They are part of how citizens acquire civic capacity. Tocqueville's account of associations gives a useful starting point. He saw Americans forming groups for moral, religious, economic, political, and local purposes. Association trained citizens in habits that constitutional design could not supply by itself. A person who joins a local group acquires experience in attending meetings, following procedures, persuading others, compromising, paying dues, volunteering time, accepting loss, and trying again. That training may sound small. It is not small. Democracy requires people who can lose a vote without treating opponents as enemies to be destroyed. Localism enters because mediating institutions know things national institutions often miss. A neighborhood group may know which intersection floods, which landlord neglects repairs, which children need coats, which elderly residents cannot reach a clinic, which school policy fails in practice, and which rumor is false. Local knowledge can correct distant bureaucracy, yet localism can also protect exclusion. The same neighborhood association that knows local needs can block affordable housing, intimidate outsiders, preserve segregation, or treat public resources as private property. The alternative to a strong civil society is not neutral individual freedom. Often the alternative is loneliness plus bureaucracy, or loneliness plus market power, or loneliness plus online identity. If citizens do not join institutions that teach cooperation, they may encounter politics mainly as national spectacle and personal resentment. They may expect government to solve every problem while lacking the local trust needed to implement solutions. They may retreat into private life and then discover that public life did not pause in their absence. But a second alternative must stay on the table: stronger state intervention when mediating institutions fail. If a school district excludes children, if a church hides abuse, if a union discriminates, if a family transmits violence, if a private association blocks equal access to public goods, government may need to intervene. Civil society cannot become a sanctuary for injustice. The freedom to associate carries public consequences, especially when associations control opportunity, safety, education, or belonging. American civil society developed through churches, lodges, ethnic associations, benevolent societies, school boards, labor unions, settlement houses, parent groups, neighborhood clubs, and voluntary charities that handled needs the state could not or would not meet. Tocqueville saw those associations in the 1830s as buffers between isolated individuals and distant government. Later reformers and civil rights organizers used the same associational terrain through black churches, women's clubs, NAACP branches, union halls, PTAs, and neighborhood committees. The background order therefore always carried a local national tension. Associations could solve problems close to the ground, but they could also defend segregation, exclusionary zoning, abusive leadership, or captured school governance. The civil society burden has never belonged to local innocence. It has always involved a contest over who forms citizens before statutes and courts intervene. Churches and religious communities carry one of the strongest formation roles in American civil society. They teach moral language, service habits, authority structures, and public obligation. They run food pantries, schools, hospitals, charities, counseling networks, prison ministries, refugee assistance, disaster relief, and voter mobilization. They can help citizens see politics through duties that exceed self-interest. They can also create closed moral worlds where dissent looks like betrayal. Religious liberty protects space for conscience, but conscience can move citizens toward justice or away from accountability. Schools carry public memory under administrative pressure. They teach history, government, literacy, discipline, and social expectation. They also sort children through attendance zones, funding formulas, tracking, testing, special education plans, discipline codes, school board decisions, and teacher discretion. A school can make citizenship feel real through debate, service, and shared voice. It can also teach that public systems humiliate or ignore entire neighborhoods. The civic lesson is not only in the textbook, it is in the hallway, the bus route, the lunch debt notice, the dress code, the security officer, the counselor's office, and the school board meeting. Families transmit identity with unmatched intimacy. They teach trust, obligation, patriotism, skepticism, class aspiration, religious belief, racial memory, gender norms, and ideas about work. A family story about military service, eviction, immigration, farming, policing, union membership, small business ownership, or public assistance can shape how a citizen hears policy debates decades later. Families are powerful because they reach citizens before formal argument. They are also difficult for government to regulate without danger. That makes family formation one of the most important and least controllable parts of civic life. Voluntary associations train procedure. A club may have bylaws, officers' dues, minutes, elections, committees, and norms of debate. A charity may teach fundraising, grant writing, volunteer coordination, eligibility rules, and accountability. A union may teach collective bargaining, grievance procedure, contract language, strike votes, and member discipline. A neighborhood association may teach zoning law, public comment, petitioning, and local budget fights. These ordinary forms make citizens literate in organized action. Someone who has chaired a meeting or managed a food drive understands public work differently from someone who only posts opinions. Communities also build social trust, which means confidence that other people and institutions will behave reliably enough for cooperation. Social trust lowers the cost of public action. If neighbors trust each other, they can organize a cleanup, watch children, support a school levy, respond to a storm, or share information. If trust collapses, every request feels like a scam, every official sounds corrupt, every neighbor looks like a threat, and every compromise feels like surrender. Government can enforce laws, but it cannot easily manufacture trust after citizens come to treat one another as enemies. The pressure on mediating institutions has grown because participation costs time and vulnerability. People work irregular hours, move more often, consume politics through screens, distrust institutions, and face constant entertainment competition. Joining a local group requires showing up with people who may annoy you. It requires listening, being bored, being outvoted, and doing tasks that do not make you feel heroic. Online politics offers faster reward. It can also leave citizens with identity but no responsibility. Failures must be named without flinching. Churches defended slavery and segregation. Schools excluded Black children, Native children, disabled children, immigrant families, and poor children through law and practice. Families transmitted racial prejudice and gender hierarchy. Unions sometimes excluded workers by race or sex. Local associations resisted integration and fair housing. Communities protected powerful abusers. Civil society can build citizens, but it can also build walls. That record cannot become a sentimental praise song for local life. Tocqueville's emphasis on associations functions like a defense brief for democratic formation. Democracy requires citizens who know how to associate. His insight remains useful because national institutions cannot carry every civic burden. Congress can pass a statute. Courts can interpret rights. Agencies can administer programs. None of those actions automatically teach neighbors how to trust one another, raise children, care for the elderly, welcome newcomers, or argue without violence. Associations provide practice. The tension is that practice can train domination as well as democracy. A local institution may teach loyalty, but loyalty can become silence. It may teach tradition, but tradition can become exclusion. It may teach service, but service can become paternalism. It may teach moral clarity, but moral clarity can become contempt. Tocqueville saw the strength of association, but the civic record still has to be judged for both production and damage. Civil society is not automatically good. It is powerful. Power requires inspection. A school board, church council, union local, neighborhood association, nonprofit board, youth league, or mutual aid network can form citizens and distribute resources. Those choices create winners, losers, insiders, outsiders, leaders, dependents, and dissenters. The question is not whether these institutions sit outside government. The question is whether they exercise their non-governmental power responsibly. The source tension also reaches federalism. Local institutions can solve problems closer to the ground, but national law sometimes has to intervene when local control becomes local oppression. Civil rights history makes that unavoidable. If local schools segregate, if local juries refuse justice, if local communities punish dissenters, if local employers exclude, then appeals to community can mask domination. Yet if national power destroys every local institution, citizens may lose the habits that make democracy livable. The hard work is not choosing local or national in the abstract. The hard work is judging when local formation deserves protection and when public authority must correct it. Civil society also connects directly to parties, media, and interest groups. Parties organize electoral competition. Media organizes attention. Interest groups organize policy pressure. Mediating institutions organize daily character, trust, and belonging. If that last layer weakens, the other layers become harsher. Parties turn into identity fortresses. Media turns into outrage supply. Interest groups turn into professionalized access without local roots. Government then faces citizens who know how to consume politics, but not how to practice citizenship. Civil society becomes a maintenance problem, not a decorative phrase. Constitutional government needs citizens who can cooperate before crisis, distrust power without becoming paranoid, serve without demanding applause, and challenge institutions without burning every bridge. Mediating institutions teach those habits when they work. When they fail, they teach fear, resentment, conformity, or exclusion. The sharpest civic test is to choose one mediating institution and judge its best function and worst risk. A church may build service and moral courage, or it may protect hierarchy and hide abuse. A school may teach public knowledge and equal citizenship, or it may reproduce inequality through funding and discipline. A family may transmit obligation and memory, or it may transmit prejudice and political fatalism. A union may teach solidarity and bargaining, or it may defend insiders at the expense of outsiders. A neighborhood group may solve local problems, or it may weaponize local control against newcomers. The civic burden falls on citizens because these institutions do not maintain themselves. Someone has to attend the meeting, teach the class, coach the team, serve on the board, bring food, keep records, challenge the abusive leader, welcome the outsider, and tell the truth when the institution lies about itself. Civil society decays when responsible people treat it as someone else's chore. The unresolved judgment is severe. When should Americans trust mediating institutions to form citizens? And when should they demand public correction because those institutions have become engines of exclusion? A serious answer will not worship community or sneer at it. It will name the institution, the power it exercises, the trust it builds, the people it harms, and the responsibility citizens bear for shaping it back. The unresolved question is whether civil society still forms citizens when its own institutions become engines of exclusion, abuse, or faction.
If you're curious how I'm using AI to build these lectures and reshape higher education, Visit thelibertytolearn.com. I'll see you in class.